Today's episode is dedicated to the Ahnenerbe Reich's secret weapon, a super mystical closed order that was, in reality, a research institute. It's an organization wrapped in perhaps the greatest number of myths, legends, and conspiracy theories of any Third Reich structure. I first heard about the Ahnenerbe in my freshman year at the institute, in a seminar led by visiting professors from Moscow State University. The course was about the evolution of weaponry from antiquity to the present. One or two lectures were given by a professor. His name escapes me, around 70 at the time, a frontline veteran who had taken Berlin. We students struck up a conversation with him, and he told us that during the storming of the Reich Chancellery in the spring of 1945, he saw strange corpses, people of Asian appearance wearing SS uniforms, with some kind of orange capes thrown over them. No one could explain who they were or how they got there. Later, I would read versions claiming that the bodies of Buddhist monks were found beneath the rubble of the Chancellery. What were they doing there? How did they get in? Were they really there at all? We'll never know for certain. But the connection between Nazi Germany and Tibet is obvious, and I'll get to that. The Ahnenerbe was involved in all of this. The organization was declared criminal at the Nuremberg trials, because aside from all the tales about inventing flying saucers, paranormal abilities, telekinesis, and other mystical pursuits, there's a second side to the story. The inhuman experiments on concentration camp prisoners, experiments on blood coagulation, on severe hypothermia, and much more. An enormous number of people became victims of this organization. We'll talk about that too. So, what was the Ahnenerbe exactly? The history of the Third Reich is steeped in mysticism and occultism. Watch documentary footage from NSDAP Nuremberg rallies, the torchlit marches forming a swastika, banners cascading in precise symmetry, columns arranged with ritualistic geometry. It all looks like a spectacle, like a mystical, ceremonial rite. You can see it with the naked eye. And it was unlike anything elsewhere, not in the Soviet Union, not in the United States, not in Great Britain. In Germany, yes. You look at those frames, at Leni Riefenstahl's films, or any other newsreels, and you feel a very dark, very occult performance unfolding before you. Where did this come from? You could argue that the German nation was always inclined toward mysticism. We could talk philosophy and cultural character. But in truth, any human being is drawn to the unknown, to the mystical Germans included. Perhaps compared to other European nations, they stood out a little more. And we ourselves weren't immune. In the final years of the Romanov Empire, occultism spread wildly from Rasputin to Helena Blavatsky. There was plenty of talk about Tibet, higher forces and the like. Occultism was widespread among elites. In 1918, the Thule Society was founded in Munich. The myth of the Atlanteans would be developed and take on a monstrous form in Nazi Germany. Rudolf von Sebottendorf, an occultist, mystic, and conspiracy monger, created Thule. Munich intellectuals were drawn in people seeking to touch the mystical. What was the society about? In primitive terms, after Atlantis sank, the Atlanteans moved to a place called Thulano. One knows exactly where, somewhere in the far north, near Iceland or Greenland, in the Scandinavian sphere. From them came the Aryan race. If you remember 17 Moments of Spring, those dossier slips, pure Aryan, Nordic character. As a child, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Aryans, in Thule's doctrine, were the highest race on Earth. Germans were their direct descendants, heirs to the supreme Nordic civilization. The search for those roots and connections was the society's credo. It was pseudo-scholarly and, of course, racist. A key figure emerges, Hermann Wirth, who wrote The Origin of Humanity. His thesis, a Nordic race created everything beautiful on Earth language, culture. Later came the Southern Gondwana, all sorts of sub-people, from black to Slav second-rate, who adopted the Nordic language, distorted it, and through blood mixing with Nordics, led humanity to degeneration. Germans, however, had preserved themselves as the chief descendants of this ruling race. Therefore, Germans must guard racial purity and assert themselves as the world's paramount humans, Übermenschen, while others are second class. All of it was scientifically justified, with evidence cherry-picked or invented. And as we'll see, it was taken quite seriously by parts of the German elite. This wasn't just a club of charlatans and lunatics, though those too were present. There were Munich professors, major industrialists, archaeologist Otto Rahn, whom I mentioned in the episode on the Cathars dug at Montségur, seeking the Holy Grail, convinced the Grail had been taken there. A known scholar, he moved in these circles. Munich's elite was permeated by Thule's ideas. Parallel to this ran Germany's humiliation after World War I. A mythology telling them they were descendants of a higher race fell on very fertile soil. Into Thule's orbit drifted future-leading Nazis. Rudolf Hess arrived first. He was assistant to Professor Karl Haushofer, a Thule member. Hess brought Hitler. Hitler absorbed it all eagerly. Historians still argue. Did he truly believe? Or did he merely exploit the mystique? It hardly matters. Whether he rationally calculated his crimes or clothed them in mysticism changes nothing. He went there. Hans Frank, future war criminal, did too. At the junction of this occult stream and the rising Nazi movement, the German Workers' Party took shape. At this moment, the swastika appears. Today it's inseparable from Nazi Germany, but the symbol is far older, found in Buddhist texts, across Hinduism in China. In India and Bali today, you'll still see the swastika in ornament as an auspicious sign, a protective charm. The swastika first appears within Thule, then migrates to the German Workers' Party's symbols. When Hitler consolidates power within the party, the swastika in a white disc on a red banner is personally approved by him. It becomes first the party standard, then the state flag, an occult sign ripped not from German philosophy, but the Indo-Tibetan tradition. While Thule evolves, Hitler ascends politically, and the personnel overlap. Around the late 1920s, our main character enters, Heinrich Himmler. He's searching for a spiritual anchor, a new philosophy. Raised Catholic, he drifted to religion, then abandoned it, looking elsewhere. He lands in Thule's milieu and absorbs its ideas. Himmler, the very man ultimately responsible for the Holocaust, who signed the orders for the final solution, found this ideology like honey to the tongue. Thule was rabidly anti-Semitic, publishing the Völkischer Beobachter, the future main Nazi paper, a toxic, programmatic anti-Semitic sheet, asserting that Jews were a festering boil on Germany's body, that they had made Germany lose the war, that they controlled everything. Educated people created and justified this bile, which appealed immensely to Himmler. From youth, he was drawn to occultism. Whether it came to him or someone planted the idea, he began to see himself as the reincarnation of Henry the Fowler, the German ruler who first united Germanic tribes. He nurtured this fantasy, and you'll soon see where it leads. Thus, two streams, occult mystical and National Socialist, merge. In 1935, Hermann Wirth organizes the exhibition The Heritage of German Ancestors, showcasing artifacts from excavations, rune stones, relics, proving the Germanic civilization's primacy in Europe. The exhibition also plants a seed. Christianity, spread across Europe, smothered the Germans. Ancient Germanic sanctuaries were destroyed. The nation's sacred core was suppressed. This begins to be discussed openly. Himmler visits and loves it. By 1935, the Nazis are in power. He's head of the SS, Hitler's personal guard. He takes the exhibition and the heritage society Ahnenerbe under his wing. Perfect for propaganda. It's not enough to proclaim, "We're Aryans with Nordic character." You need a scientific base. The occult current seeking the ancient Germanic faith and its evidence fits perfectly. Wirth becomes president of the Ahnenerbe, and they move forward hand in hand. Short practical aside omitted in the original flow. Another necessary aside. Hitler may have had a touch of mysticism, but Himmler was consumed by it. Reincarnation of the Fowler, a new religion, the Black SS Order, a monastic brotherhood, this all comes. Around such beliefs swarm charlatans. That's how mystic industries function. When clients are ready to believe, sellers appear. Even today, big businessmen keep astrologers and magicians. Nothing new. One example, in Himmler's circle appears Karl Maria Willigut, old German aristocracy on one hand, former psychiatric patient on the other. He claims descent from Thor, the Norse god with the hammer. Himmler loves it. Willigut conducts excavations, claiming ancient Germanic sanctuaries hide magical artifacts that grant powers levitation, telekinesis. Himmler supports it. Wirth substantiates it with ancient texts. Enter the runes. The SS sigil is 2 Sowilo, Sig runes. Runes were widespread on unit chevrons, insignias. What are runes? Not merely old letters, but talismans, occult sigils. Himmler adored the idea. Combined 2 Sig runes for the SS, both a logo and a strongest protective charm. He was all in. All went swimmingly until 1936, when Hitler unleashed a blistering critique of Hermann Wirth. We're building a very different future. To hell with Atlanteans and mysticism. Stop confusing people. Aryan race understood. But this runic occult nonsense is rubbish. He also knew Himmler had this weakness and tolerated it only so far. Sensing danger, Himmler expels Wirth from the Ahnenerbe in 1937 and takes command himself. He transforms the Heritage Society into the Ahnenerbe Forschungs- und Lehrgemeinschaft, a research institute, spanning every sphere of German society. Here's a glimpse of its sprawl, 1 page of departments. There were several more. Astronomy studying celestial phenomena, minor within the structure but present. Biology, improving. The human body, medicine, and so on. Botany breeding new crops, from wheat onward. Geology and mineralogy soils and strata, both for secret bunkers and ranges. And for example, pre-war expeditions to Abkhazia's Lake Ritsa to test water thought suitable for blood plasma. Excavations, digging across Germany. And later, occupied territories for traces of ancient Germans, sanctuaries, sacrificial pits, tools of war and tillage, to reassemble the heritage piece by piece. Germanic art, proving ancient Germanic dominance in European art. It was shuttered quickly in 1938. Heraldry new coats of arms, ancestral tracings, back 8 or 10 generations. A telling anecdote, a German actress once taunted Himmler. If the ideal are tall, blonde, blue-eyed Aryans, why do the Reich's leaders look so un-Aryan? We are Aryan in spirit, came the reply. Convenient. Indo-Germanic and Finno-Germanic relations, seeking shards of the Aryan race worldwide. Scandinavia, Tibet, Finland, the Baltics. Arguing they were fragments of a single proto-civilization. Meteorology. Caves and karst ancient cave settlements. Plant genetics. Sagas and legends. Because power lies there too, and mystic beliefs of the ancients can be applied to the present. Even claims that swords found in Teutoburg Forest could reconnect a warrior with his ancestors. Barrows and habitation mounds. Occult sciences, self-explanatory. Department Hexen, witches. This is crucial. Christianity hindered the Reich. A new religion was needed. Himmler leaned in. They gathered records across Europe of witches, burned by Christians recasting them as wise healers, whom the church suppressed to extinguish German sacredness. They created a card index of 35,000 witches culled over 400 years. Expeditions ran field missions. Department M Mathematics. Its members touched the V2 program. And national desks, Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Britain, etc. Himmler's plan was clear. Embed the Ahnenerbe as a research and teaching organism into propaganda, religion, primary and higher education, and party structures, becoming the Reich's spiritual ideological backbone. Many believe persuasively that Himmler saw himself as Hitler's heir. He was turning the SS from a guard detachment into a second army, creating his own religion and monastic black order, laying the groundwork to rule after the victory over the Soviet Union. As for those Tibetan monks under the chancellery, whether they were there or not, no one can prove now. But what we do know is that the SS sent an expedition to Tibet. It was led by Ernst Schaffer, a specialist in Indology and Tibet. In 1938, the mission left for Tibet. There's a key context. The Dalai Lama had died, and the successor wasn't yet enthroned an interregnum of sorts. The Germans were received in Lhasa, shown ancient artifacts. Their main task, find links between Tibet's old civilization and the Aryan civilization, the supposed ancestors of the German nation. They collected artifacts. They were gifted old manuscripts. They exported a high-altitude Tibetan wheat that ripened in 60 days on poor mountain soils to seed Reich lands. They measured skulls obsessed with Aryan craniology to prove Tibetan and German skulls both belonged to the Great Aryan Whole. They set up a radio link, Lhasa Berlin, which worked until war's end. A myth claims they sought Shambhala, a secret locus granting superpowers, movement between parallel worlds, attacks launched from elsewhere. Naturally, they found no Shambhala, but they returned with manuscripts, tableware, and even a Tibetan mastiff gifted to Hitler, which it seems died en route. A film, Geheimnis Tibet, The Secret Tibet, was produced and shown in Nazi cinemas, drawing a line. Tibetan lamas, their occultism. This is part of our Germanic nation. Look at their aggressive dances. We too carry aggression and the urge to expand living space in our blood. Another 1938 expedition went to the Middle East in search of artifacts of that older civilization. In 1939, they came back and headed to Iceland to study Viking heritage, also Germanic. Runes, rune stones, talismans. Within the SS, rune reading and the study of the Edda's Old Norse epics were formally taught to members only. Lectures asserted that ancient Germans drowned homosexuals, criminals, the insane, and traitors in bogs, so ruthlessness toward prisoners had tradition. In Scandinavia, a figure Himmler adored was Yrjö von Grönhagen, a Finnish-born scholar who translated the Karelian epic Kalevala again, finding traces of the ancient Pan-Germanic civilization. Himmler sent him to Karelia to seek remnants and to expand the witches' card index to 30,000 entries. Meanwhile, experiments in telekinesis, telepathy, long-distance information transfer, hypnosis, all were briskly pursued. Some were charlatans, but some people believed wholeheartedly. In 1940, another expedition roamed the Baltics for Teutonic traces, arguing that the medieval Teutonic order had inherited ancient Germanic knowledge alongside Masonic lines. They hunted rudiments from crystal skulls, see my episode on Mesoamerican civilizations, to the Holy Grail, trying to unearth it at Montségur in France. All of it was to be gathered in Berlin so that the artifact's mystical power could be harnessed for a new man. By then, the Germans were obsessed with selective breeding. Himmler built the SS as a monastic order. Candidacy required genealogies back to 1800. Marriage required the bride's pedigree free of Jewish or Untermensch blood. Through selection, they sought to create a new race: tall, fair, blue-eyed, strong. SS weddings followed special rites. Children were to be conceived at winter or summer solstice, as ancient Germans did. The entire brew of mystical and conspiracist nonsense you can find today on fringe channels, anti-vax style, existed then as rigid directives. Himmler's obsessions were twofold: exterminating Jews, hindering the German nation, and breeding the new race of lords. A new religion would follow from that. He envisioned his own, in which he would reign after Hitler. To close the mystical arc, before we move to the brutally practical, a word on artifacts. The Nazis searched everywhere. The Holy Grail they tried to dig up at Montsegur. The crystal skulls in Latin America, an expedition to Lake Titicaca, was planned for the 1940s, cancelled by the war. Project Thor's Hammer, Willy Gut's brainchild. In his telling, Mjolnir was a super weapon of electricity. The Ahnenerbe funded research into harvesting lightning to disable enemy machinery without shells. Another project, Rhine Gold, from the old saga extracting gold from Rhine waters using Aryan tech. Funded, then closed. The Spear of Longinus, several exist, one in Vienna. During the Anschluss, it was taken to Germany, a replica made, and declared the sole true spear, known as the Spear of Destiny. You might recall it from the game Wolfenstein. One copy went to Himmler and was placed in his castle. We'll get there in a moment. While some sought Shambhala and translated the Kalevala, others in the Ahnenerbe did very practical things: medicine and science. The Germans were fixated on several topics. First, a cure for cancer. They leaned on ancient Germanic homeopathy, botany, herbs, a mysterious Aryan tea that supposedly healed wounds. One figure, Philip Leonard Noe, not the Nobel physicist. Here the reference is to a botanically inclined healer milieu pursued herbal cures. No true cancer cure was found. People continued to die during and after the war. That was the relatively harmless part. Then there was August Hirt. He studied the effects of poison gas on humans. Camp inmates were used for experiments. How much gas could a person survive? If administered an antidote after a given dose, would he live? I'm simplifying. I'm not a physician and won't dwell in the technicalities, but these were experiments on living prisoners. Hirt was also an extreme anti-Semite. He sought to prove Aryan superiority by craniometry. In his Strasbourg lab, Allied troops found bodies in formalin heads he had sawn off for science. He had a collection of Jewish skulls to demonstrate racial inferiority by measurements. This was pseudoscience shackled to murder. Another figure, Edouard May, an entomologist studying rats, roaches, parasites. In reality, he worked on biological weapons for the Reich. By war's end, the weapon was nearly ready. The archives and drawings vanished afterward. Heinz Brücker worked on plant genetics, making wheat, potatoes, tomatoes more productive. Food was a strategic question. He boasted that Germans would never face food shortages for a century thanks to genetic advances. How did he innovate? Partly through his own research, partly by theft. In the USSR, he seized the archives of our geneticist, Nikolai Vavilov, jailed by the Soviets, then built his work atop them. Brücker was not tried after the war. He pursued botany and fertilizers, died in Argentina, murdered on his farm at 71. Rumor says he bred a parasite that attacked coca plantations. Colombian mafia, learning of it, eliminated the old German. Alex Berg, another homeopath, worked up herbal poultices and an Aryan tea for wounds. To me, charlatanry. but it had official patrons. The most monstrous, perhaps, Sigmund Rascher at Dachau. He corresponded directly with Himmler. He studied hypothermia. Prisoners were frozen, then rewarmed with that same Aryan tea or with hot water. How quickly could a near-dead body be revived? For the front, this mattered. He tested human warmth as a rewarming method, and so on. Many died. Low-pressure chamber experiments, aviation, and U-boats needed data saw perhaps 2 survivors out of 200. People were deliberately wounded to test clotting agents. How quickly could you stop bleeding in battle? Rascher also dabbled in gynecology, promising to cure German female infertility. My wife bore a second child at 49, a third at 52, he wrote. We've invented a miracle remedy. Once we test it, we'll stock it in every pharmacy. Himmler was delighted. Then, in the 1940s, Rascher's wife was caught at Munich station trying to kidnap an infant. An investigation revealed all their miracle children were abducted babies. Rascher and wife were sent to a camp. She hanged herself. He was executed. Shot in the back of the head a day before Allied troops arrived. Perhaps someone wanted to erase traces. As you see, the Ahnenerbe spanned everything. Mysticism to feed the Aryan myth, and brutally practical research for battlefield medicine. Himmler often attended Ahnenerbe scientific councils, and, as its president, was deeply involved. Who paid for all this? Funding was phenomenal. That's why young scientists flocked there. Good money. Fantasies like Rheingold got cut, but serious work in botany, medicine, disaster medicine was lavishly financed. Part came from the state Reichsbank, part from Himmler's circle of friends, industrialists and factory owners outside politics, as they claimed at Nuremberg. The 2 biggest donors? Daimler-Benz and BMW. They endowed grants and wired funds underwriting these experiments. You can argue some of it was coercion. When the SS asks, you don't refuse. But we know how things worked. Both had war contracts. Both used camp slave labor. It was mutually beneficial. Where was Hitler in all this? It's convenient to picture him as a mystical madman, but he was, by witness accounts, a talented, practical mind. He supported Himmler where it fit breeding a new Aryan race, a new religion. He did not believe in Christianity and thought the Germans needed a new faith. Beyond that, he cared little. Himmler gathered his esoterica into a doctrine of higher forces standing behind Hitler, presenting it to Adolf as validation. He wasn't just leading the nation, he was fulfilling a mission. That flattered Hitler. Himmler truly believed, though, publicly the faithful Heinrich, the shadow of the Führer privately, architect of a new Germanic civilization built for himself. In 1934 begins the story of Wewelsburg Castle, familiar from films, and, yes, the archetype for Wolfenstein. It became Himmler's residence. Initially conceived as an SS school, a forge of cadres, with an SS university and training camp, it was chosen on Willigut's advice, near Germanic holy places. The Teutoburg Forest, where Germanic tribes crushed Roman legions, the Externstein ancient Germanic cult rocks, a sacred oak the Irminsul, the Germanic tree of life felled by Charlemagne. Christianization had strangled the Germanic race. Reviving it there would be symbolic. Himmler first builds the SS school, then transforms the castle into his seat. Here emerges the Black Order of the SSA monastic brotherhood. The famous SS ring, the Totenkopf, a silver ring with a skull and SS runes, engraved with the owner's name, was presented personally by Himmler as a high honor. Upon the owner's death, the ring was to be returned to Wewelsburg, to lie in the crypt property of the order, never to be sold or traded. He envisioned the SS as monks, hence rune instruction as a source of luck, protection, and battle powers. Teacher Herbert Jankun lectured SS men on ancient Germanic traditions, how the sword of the ancestors could grant super strength. The Spear of Destiny copy was brought to Wewelsburg and stood in Himmler's office. Runes covered the decor. I visited the castle once. It was blown up in 1945, but the North Tower, the heart of the complex, has been restored. The lower level was to be a crypt for the Order's greatest heroes. Above, a circular hall, 48 windows. A hall of the Holy Grail with an eternal flame. The flues remain. On the floor, the Black Sun, a mosaic still there today, an old Indo-Tibetan symbol. The place is open to tourists. I'm not superstitious, but the energy feels foul. You don't feel well inside. Not because Nazi secrets hide in the cellars, simply because fanatics steeped the walls with their presence. On maps, Wewelsburg's plan echoes a spearhead again, symbology on symbology. The Hitler-Tibet yoga thread arises here too. At one point, Hitler developed a fascination with yoga and Indology. By every sign, Himmler was building a world order he meant to lead. Runes, artifacts, all roads led to his citadel. In 1945, as the Red Army advanced, the castle was blown, later rebuilt. You can visit it. The rings were to be kept there, the spear copy, all the relics I've described. A related legend speaks of a primeval battle by the last birch nearby, where West and East clashed in immemorial time, sundering mankind into two tribes. In Nazi telling, it was a cosmic dualism. Their good against our evil. Myth stacked upon myth. If Department H, Witches, was the conspiracist wing with its pan-European index, Department M, Mathematics, led by Professor Bose, was utterly practical. Ahnenerbe personnel were embedded in every major technology program of the Reich. Late war Germany was advanced. The first operational jet fighter, Messerschmitt, the V-2 ballistic missile, near completion of a nuclear reactor, near-ready biological weapons. Documents show Ahnenerbe men had access. What became of them? They didn't simply vanish. Archives went to the Allies. Bose disappears without a trace after the war gone, as if never existed. Wolfram Sievers, the Ahnenerbe's managing director, stood trial. Not at the main Nuremberg, but later, and was hanged, though on some lists he ranked only around the 2000th defendant by priority. Evidently, he possessed information better kept from the public record. The Americans ran Operation Overcast, and then Paperclip, exporting German scientists and, quietly, Ahnenerbe staff. To the U.S., Werner von Braun, not Ahnenerbe, went openly. Congress officially banned Ahnenerbe members from U.S. work, yet many arrived under wraps. Archives were classified there and here. Something is in there that governments have no desire to publish. Himmler never faced justice. In 1945, the faithful Heinrich opened back-channel talks with the Allies, know the cynicism through intermediaries, even approaching international Jewish organizations. The man responsible for the Holocaust offered goodwill, releasing 100,000 Jews from camps. Hitler discovered his treachery. One reason Dönitz, not Himmler, was named successor. Himmler fled under false papers, was arrested by Soviet soldiers, and handed to the Allies. There he revealed his real identity and, during questioning, bit a cyanide ampoule and died. He did not make it to Nuremberg. Sievers was hanged later. Most other Ahnenerbe figures lived long, untroubled lives. Uriah von Grönhagen died in 2003. No need to attribute this to mystic Germanic forces. They simply reintegrated. One head of the Hexen Sonderkommando, Rudolf Levin, who compiled the 30,000 witch files, also evaporates. In 1945, no trace. Those who headed crucial departments, mathematics, witches, vanished, perhaps flown out by allies, perhaps living under new names in Latin America. The Ahnenerbe archives went to the victors. Wewelsburg was blown, then restored. That's how the Ahnenerbe ends. One more story, often linked to the Ahnenerbe, though the connection is murky. Neuschwabenland, the Antarctic Reich. A persistent theory says Hitler didn't shoot himself and wasn't burned. He escaped to Latin America, or version 2, to Antarctica. In 1938-39, the German Society for Polar Research sent an expedition to Antarctica aboard the Schwabenland, with a Dornier seaplane hoisted by crane. They surveyed the Queen Maud Land sector, describing warm, cave-like ice formations, ice-free oases. Germany staked claims. If Antarctica was terra nullius, a German sector must exist. After all, as Viking descendants, they too had a polar destiny. That's documented. The conspiracy takes off in 1947, 2 years after the war, with the U.S. Navy's high-jump expedition warships and aircraft steaming south to test logistics and security. Flight times to the U.S. from Antarctica might be shortened. Could the USSR or anyone base bombers there? During the mission, accidents killed several. The fleet returned. 5 to 7 years later, the press sprouted tales. Saucers with swastikas bursting from the waters, lasers lancing U.S. ships, heavy losses proof of a hidden Nazi redoubt. Add the Ahnenerbe archives, supposedly spirited away by U-boat, Hitler conveyed there. A union of Nazis with aliens, extraterrestrial tech gleaned from mystical artifacts, the Third Reich reborn under the ice. If you search the web, you'll find 1,000 sources, 1,000 leaks about High Jump's real story. In short, a grand mythos of Neuschwabenland. Did the Ahnenerbe have a hand? Hard to say. We know about jets and V2s, but beyond that, earthquakes by geomagnetic weapons, flying discs, an endless box of conspiracies lies in the Ahnenerbe's shadow. To close, the man who set it all in motion. Rudolf von Sebottendorf, founder of Thule the Seed, from which the Ahnenerbe grew. He fell into disfavor in the 1940s, people tired of his occultism. He ended up in Istanbul, reportedly working as an Abwehr asset supplying intelligence, perhaps merely hiding and dabbling in mysticism. What we know is that in 1945, with Germany defeated, he threw himself into the Bosphorus and killed himself. That was the Ahnenerbe, likely the Reich's most secretive, mystical organization, and, in reality, a very practical, very criminal institute. Not a playful Indiana Jones adventure, but a lethal, bureaucratic machine.